Justin Trudeau threatened Canadians with potential loss of travel privileges, even saying they may not be able to get a passport if they participated in protests. I'm going to share with you what happened and why this matters. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. This is Nomad Capitalist, where we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. Canada has become a mess. For years, I heard Canadians say, I don't need a second citizenship. We don't have that citizenship-based taxation as Americans do. Our country is still a democratic country. Now, I'm not coming here to tell you that Canada has lowered itself to the ranks of North Korea. Let's not go to that extent. And with the recent protests in Canada, I wasn't there. I didn't follow it that closely other than the headlines, and so I don't want to comment on all the different characters. I'm sure in any kind of protest you have good people, you have bad people. I don't want to get into that, but I want to talk about the things that Justin Trudeau and the Canadian government did to respond to that, which was to invoke the Emergency Powers Act, something that hasn't been done for decades in peacetime, to freeze bank accounts, and all kinds of other stuff that should give you pause. That's the stuff that I want to talk about. I'm not here to talk about domestic policy, but I am here to talk about your ability to go where you're treated best. Now, we've been hearing from an increasing number of Canadians in the last 2 years. They're some of the favorite people that we work with here who are concerned about all the different policies in their country. One thing I tell people, by the way, is, just because things you don't agree with go away doesn't mean you're in the clear. The general trend my entire adult life, and I think in general, is fewer freedoms, less liberty, higher taxes, more regulation, less social cohesion, more blaming successful people. That is the trend in legacy brand countries. I think Canada represents that very well. And so the idea that perhaps, we had a protest and it went well, and now they're doing this and now they're doing that, I wouldn't rely on that as, oh my goodness, everything's back to normal, the country's great again, oh Canada, rah, rah, rah. I would say you have politicians who, by the way, they didn't take over in a coup. Somebody put them there. Somebody had to be, obviously it's a different system in Canada, but somebody had to be empowered to say, hey, Justin Trudeau's our guy. And so what's going to happen with Justin Trudeau? What's he going to do next? What is the country going to do next? Seeing that, and I know people disagree with this, but seeing that in the Western world, by and large, most people do not agree with freedom. They agree with being nice. They agree with being polite. They agree with, hey, let's just give them a chance. And so, I'm not in the far fringes against the government, but I generally have, a reasonable distrust of the government. They don't want you to have freedoms anymore, especially in the Western world. And so your fellow citizens want what's happening in Canada to continue. Again, we're going to see a ton of comments from people who say, no, everyone's with this group or they're with the truckers. By and large, they're not. I always look at it like back after the 1984 election, there were stories, this is in the United States, of people in New York City say, well, nobody I know voted for Reagan. How did this guy win in a landslide? Right, because no one you know. You're surrounded by people like you. The vast majority of people in the Western world do not want freedom. Now, eventually, will they step up and speak on individual freedom issues? They may eventually, yes. But the general trend is, hey, we don't need so much freedom, and that's why they're legacy brand countries. They don't remember why freedom worked in the first place, so now they're less and less inclined to want it. You've seen that in Canada. You've seen that in Australia. Now, let's talk about the travel privileges. Justin Trudeau gave a speech. We don't run clips of speeches here because I'm always wondering, who's going to come and say, no, that's our speech. You can't run that. Listen, I got enough problems. All right, so you can find it, but I got enough problems. Basically what Justin Trudeau did was he threatened the protesters. He said, listen, if we come, you may lose your ability to get a passport. You may lose your ability to travel. And then he said, including to the United States, which I guess if you're Canadian, travel to the United States seems pretty commonplace. Some people live literally on the border. They go back and forth all the time. But of course the United States is one of the most difficult countries in the world to travel to. I have numerous acquaintances that I've heard from over the years. Remember one gentleman who was from Eastern Europe, but in the European Union. He traveled to Canada, visa-free, got right in, no problems, everyone was very nice. He went across the border at Niagara Falls. they didn't let him in because they didn't understand he worked in the freelance space. And so they turned him back around, and he ended up at the same place that the same person he stamped out with in Canada. And they said, "Oh, you're back already?" He said, "Oh yeah, they rejected me." She said, "Oh, we see that from time to time." So the USA, maybe for Canadians, but for most people, not that difficult, which kind of shows that, of course, Justin Trudeau wasn't thinking very internationally, but that's fine. He's saying, hey, you may lose your ability to travel. Now, I think what he's referring to there is, hey, if you get arrested for protesting, and that's going to go on your record, we may share that with the U.S., or the U.S. may find that, generally speaking, you can't go to the U.S. if you've got a criminal record, even if you're Canadian. You saw that, for example, it goes both ways. George W. Bush famously had issues getting into Canada because of his DUI. But Justin Trudeau also said that your right to travel internationally could be forfeited because you protest. And so, is there some basis for, hey, if we arrest you because you're protesting, which you could argue, was that the right approach? But if we arrest you and you get this record, certainly it seems like some of the charges they were going after, I mean, we're invoking the Emergency Act, we're calling some of these people terrorists. You can agree or disagree. Seems like a little much. Certainly, okay, maybe some people, you can argue maybe some people had it coming, but I mean, really? It seemed like a little bit carried away. And so, yeah, I would imagine if you tried to travel to the U.S. and you went there like, hey, any criminal record? Yeah, I was charged as a terrorist. You think they're letting you into the country? You think you're going to get too many visas? Do you think you're going to get too many residence permits? And so the next level that Justin Trudeau didn't mention that we talk about here is if you go and apply for some kind of residence or citizenship program here, some very minor issue, I always reference, urinating in a bush when you're 19 years old. And if you're 43 and you haven't done anything since then, you're probably not going to have too many issues. You may in a couple places. But, depending on what depending on what a politician who's invoked the Emergencies Act decides to charge you with, even a simple charge, if dismissed, if pled down to something else, I mean, that may be required to be disclosed. You may not be able to qualify for certain residence or citizenship programs. So, obviously, not getting in trouble is generally the best idea. And there are certainly cases where if you commit a very, very high-level crime, a citizenship that you obtain, for example, through investment could be revoked because the country doesn't want the stigma of having someone who committed such a high-level crime. But by and large, if you had a residence or citizenship, before you get into this kind of trouble, you would be in better shape. And so this is number one, why get your residences and citizenships now. Obviously, the issue financially was people talked about Bitcoin. Fine, have Bitcoin, but why not have fiat in some bank account somewhere else where you can be diversified, where at least if you get in trouble, hey, you know what? It's still the rule of law in Canada, so they say. At least you can defend yourself. At least you have some money you can access in case they freeze all your money because you're a big bad terrorist. And so, I mean, the overall idea here is, number one, what if the government simply says, as Justin Trudeau intimated, or at one point even got very close to seeming to say, we're not going to give you a passport. Again, I talked about Boris Johnson. I've been saying it for a while now in the UK. Hey, you know what? If you're a criminal, maybe we don't want to give you a passport. Good, you're going to stay here. Good luck. And never leave, I guess. What if they do that? What if they, using, some of these, when Justin Trudeau got more aggressive, what if they say, okay, now we're gonna mar your record so you can't go anywhere else as a tourist or get a residence or get a citizenship? The governments in the Western world really it's one of the big trends. It's wealth tax, it's citizenship-based taxation to a certain extent. Those are trends that they're pushing because they're broke. But on a personal level, they really don't want to give people passports. Look at how long it took them during COVID. Now, I understand government offices and many people were working at half capacity, although, how many companies that you worked with during COVID, that was their excuse? Like, oh, we can't answer your email because it's COVID. As if people can't work from home and answer emails. I mean, you would think that the government, for all the money you pay them, would figure out a way to be able to give you a passport. And they just don't really want to do that. That was the excuse for a while, and now that's coming back online. Now it's going to be that they don't like what you're saying. You have people coming and knocking at your door. There's videos on social media. To be honest, it's weird for me to say because I have a beef with these countries for their ridiculous taxes, their regulations. Yes, that's not as free as people think it is. I can't say that I thought that the police would be coming and knocking at your door in these allegedly free world countries and saying, why did you post this to Facebook? I understand if it's like really over the top. I get that. If it's just, hey, I think this is ridiculous, and so it's really, when it comes to what we do here at Nomad Capitalist, is the idea that they wouldn't give you a passport because something that you said disagreed with them, or they found a way that you get in trouble. I don't want to think that would happen. I don't want to be conspiratorial, but when they're coming and knocking on your door, when they're invoking the Emergencies Act, when they're freezing bank accounts, that should give you pause, because I don't know how many people thought that would ever happen. And so being threatened to not be able to travel, being threatened to not be able to leave the country, being threatened with loss of passport, and being threatened, for my purposes, with no one else will want to take you, that's concerning. Obviously, there are always bad actors. I'm not standing up for that. Let me be clear about that. But for average people who want to participate in a democratic system, this seems a little bit too far. Don't stop now. We've got well over 1,000 more videos here on YouTube for you to watch and learn how to go where you're treated best. And if you want to work with Nomad Capitalist personally, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn about our unique, tried and true process, garnered over years of experience, and learn how you can become our client.